What is up, Ravens flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I am James Haskell, along with my co-host Glenn Martin, and you guys might know the friendly face and friend of the show, Jeff Zrebiec, below us, who probably needs no introduction, but we will introduce him nonetheless. The one and only Jeff Zrebiec from The Athletic, and of course the Maryland, the Maryland Sportswriter of the Year. Big congrats, Jeff!
Yeah, shout out,
man.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
And this is not because you're on the show. We go to you first on Twitter before anyone else. There's a lot of competing voices out there. We go to you first, so we appreciate it. I don't know how you type so fast, but you do a great job.
I do have a lot of typos, and I know some people get on me for that, but, I feel like people want me to respond and interact, and that's a little more important, getting to as many messages as possible than worrying about making a few spelling mistakes or grammatical errors. So you kind of take the good with the bad there.
Absolutely. Now, this is the most important question I want to ask you tonight. Do you use your laptop to tweet, or is it all on the phones? Is it all thumbs?
Obviously when I'm at like Ravens have their media availability and stuff, when we were allowed in the building or even outside the building, I would, it's obviously over the phone. I don't bring my laptop to the podium, yeah. But when I'm working from home, I usually do it on my laptop, like it's the worst is, the Ravens have their, podium outside, and especially, in COVID days, we weren't allowed in the building. So every interview was outside. And some of these practices, it was damn cold, and your hands are cold and you're trying to tweet, and which just created even more problems.
Just lose all dexterity. Yes. Yeah. I can certainly understand that. Now, we gotta kind of put last season to bed, and there's still a lot of fans that need to get, some things off their chest. And I'm hoping maybe this show will help, those guys be able to move on from this season. But so I want to start with the Ravens open 8-3. They're the number 1 seed in the AFC, and then the collapse happened. So who is most to blame for that 6-game losing streak that ultimately led to them missing the playoffs? Is it as simple as they didn't have QB1 under center?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. You hate to pin it on one thing, but Lamar Jackson, even if he's struggling, and we saw it in certain games, obviously the Indianapolis Colts game when he got hot, the Kansas City game, just with it, with a couple drives, he can erase like 3/4 of struggles. I mean, he just, he has the ability to make plays late and take over games. And there was, 2 or 3 games this year, he just flat out took over Kansas City, Indianapolis, and not having, that piece. I give Tyler Huntley a lot of credit. He hung in there, and they were competent on offense. They weren't good or anything, but they were competent. And when you watch some of the other backup quarterbacks play this year, and those offenses were like, you couldn't even function without their starters. So they functioned with Huntley. They just, they were just lacking. They just didn't. They didn't finish drives, and they just didn't have that X factor out there. So I think Lamar's health was a big part of it. And I honestly think, guys, it just, I don't want to pin everything on injuries, but you keep taking body blows every week, and it's one less guy subtracted. You already knew the guys they went into the season without. Then you lose a guy here, and then you lose a guy the next week, and then you have a COVID, bunch of guys get COVID and they're not available. I just think they got worn down. They were finding ways to win games. I think we all thought early that was probably, that recipe was probably not sustainable. And, as the season got later, I just think they got worn down. You had to rely on more and more players that probably should not have been playing. And, you didn't have your quarterback out there to erase some of the flaws, and, everything just kind of came together. But, even when they were 8-3, you talk to people in the building, and I think they knew, not that they were going to collapse, but I think they knew they were going to have to, fix a lot, and there's going to have to be a lot of things go their way, for them to, make a run in the playoffs. They knew they were kind of hanging by a thread there, even when they were winning.
Yeah, certainly. It felt like one of those moments where you come out of a long distance race too fast and, you just hit a brick wall, and it's like not too much you can do about it.
So much was made about John Harbaugh's, decisions late in the game to go for, the 2-point conversion in Green Bay and Pittsburgh. And, I don't want to put words in John Harbaugh's mouth. We all know how much he enjoys when reporters do that, but I think he knew. I think he knew that they had to find a way to win a game, to bank wins, and their best way was just to go for it. 2 yards, let's try to get it. We don't know how many wins we're going to be in position for the rest of the way. I think they all knew they were in a little bit of trouble there heading down the stretch. And, they felt like, given the team's flaws and the team's situation, there was a much better chance of them getting 2 yards and maybe winning the game for the late 2-point conversion than, stopping them on the way back or going to overtime, winning a coin toss and trying to mount another drive or trying to stop them again. So I'm not saying that was always the right call, but you could tell what he felt about the team and its flaws and all that by those decisions. That's at least how I read it.
Yeah, and if I could quickly follow up there, I can't remember which player it was that just had a postseason or end of the season presser, and he said that the crazy thing is they could have very well been 5-1 down the stretch. I mean, really, only the Bengals game was the unwinnable one, and all the others, they had every opportunity. So even with the fact that their roster was so depleted, they were still in every game during that losing streak.
Yeah, and I don't think you can even say, they sort of hung in by smoke and mirrors. I mean, they probably outplayed the Steelers in Week 18. They should have won that game. I think they had a lead against the Rams for 3.5 quarters. The Rams are getting prepared to play in a divisional playoff game this weekend. It's not like they weren't. It's not like they just hung around and were finding a way. I mean, there's stretches of those games where they look like the better team and they look like they're controlling the game, and they just weren't able to finish. So it's always tough. It makes it tough to evaluate. There's no moral victories. The Ravens have won a lot of games, but other than the 2 Bengals games, and certainly the game in Miami was just a bad performance all around. But other than those 3 games, you could they had every chance to win the rest of their games.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things we want you to do, and we talked about the depletion as far as the roster goes, but how would you grade this offense? Now that the season's over, it's kind of a tale of 2 offenses. You mentioned it. Yeah. After Lamar left, it was a totally different story. But what kind of grade would you give this offense now that the season is over?
Yeah, it's always, and I did grades, but it was more position by position, and you always hear from people that disagree with some of them. And, it's hard to argue. People look at grading different. I mean, are we grading by expectations, or are we grading by just overall production? And, like for the running backs is a good example. Like, what did we really expect with 2 guys they pulled off the street that weren't wanted by other teams? So, Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman, they pretty much gave them what I think you could expect. But overall, I guess I would say somewhere around a C-, C-. Given all their challenges, it was tough to expect, and given the personnel, it was tough to expect them to be a whole lot more productive at times than I think they were. But then there was situations where it was just so maddening how they would shoot themselves in the foot. The not finishing drives, the pre-snap penalties is just out of control. The lack of pace at times offensively, and some of the stuff falls on Greg Roman, but there's also execution issues too at times. So it's tough. I don't want to kill them and just say they were just awful, because they weren't. Like I was talking to someone else, and someone was just saying the play calling was just a disaster this year. You look at the final numbers offensively for what the Ravens were putting out there on a week-by-week basis, a patchwork offensive line, 2 running backs off the street, a backup quarterback for almost a third of the season. And you're like, okay, that's kind of acceptable, kind of what you'd expect. But, obviously, given the nature of some of the games and kind of some of the opportunities they missed, it's sort of, you look at it a little more negatively because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And specifically, if we ask about Greg Roman, it's interesting because before the season, the fans said, we don't want to be number 1 in rushing and number 32 in passing. We want to close that gap. We don't need to be number 1 in rushing if we're not dead last in passing. So then at the end of the season, I look and I see, well, we're 3rd in rushing, we're 13th in passing.
Yeah.
So, and that's
everyone
with all
wants
those,
Greg gone.
And that's with all those injuries. So but then a part of me goes, well, we might need to get away from Greg if the offense is to take the next step. So help me, Jeff. How do they decide on what to do here?
Yeah, it's a tough call, guys. And at this point, we still haven't talked to, John Harbaugh hasn't had a season-ending press conference, which is kind of rare, and I don't think it's going to be this week. So again, their team, their Harbaugh, DeCosta, I assume Dick Cass, they're doing that Ravens Summit this weekend at one of Steve Bisciotti's homes. So they're going to have organizational meetings this weekend, and hopefully we'll hear from some of the brain trust next week. So I've a lesson I learned, and I don't want to take this too off track, but a lesson I've learned about reporting on the coordinator situation. I even forgot what year it was, but it was probably like 4 years ago. Heading into their last game of the season, they've been eliminated. And I just wrote I was working for the Baltimore Sun at the time, and I wrote a story about how this Raven team is going to look very different the next time you see him. And I mentioned some of the guys were free agents, some of the guys, and at the time, Marty Morningweg was the offensive coordinator. And guys, and this was when we had locker room access, so I could talk to players privately, and you heard from other people in the building, and other coaches that nobody expected Marty Morningweg to be back. It was almost looked at like a foregone conclusion. And I didn't write it like it was a news story. It was part of a bigger story about all these changes. And I said, I forgot the wording I used, but I said it would be kind of a surprise if Morningweg's back. I mean, again, it was taken it was a given at that point. And sure enough, he was back the next year. And John Harbaugh brought it up to me during a meeting with reporters, like, how did you get that one wrong? And he was right. I was wrong, but I learned a lesson that day. I wrote it like it was a formality. I didn't say according to sources, but everyone's saying it. Just seemed like it was so obvious. So that being said, some of these coordinator decisions you'd think would go one way, and they don't. So I think we're all just waiting to see how it's going to play out. There's been no, last week they had organization coaching meetings and all that, and Greg Roman was in all of them. Wink Martindale was in all of them. I think there'll be a few changes. There's going to be some staff members there that'll probably get other jobs with all these, I guess there's 9 coaching openings around the league. There's going to be some people moving, but still it'll be interesting. There's been no official word, about either coordinator, but I think with Greg Roman, I've just accepted it. When the Ravens offense plays really well, it's, oh my God, Lamar Jackson is great. And this guy's the MVP and the GOAT and all that stuff. And when they play really poorly, it's, man, does Greg Roman suck as an offensive coordinator? So he's in kind of a no-win situation. I think he did some nice things. I think they did some nice things as an offense. At times, I like some of the wrinkles. I think the receiving core, was impacted positively. And like Glenn said, I mean, I think if you saw it at the beginning of the year that they would have been ranked as the 13th pass offense in the league, you would have signed up for that in blood. I mean, I think that's the way their offense is, they're not going to be a top 5 passing team. But if you're middle of the pack and as well as they run the ball, you'd have to accept that. So I think there was definitely strides there. And if you don't see any of the strides, you're not looking for them because you want to hate on Greg Roman. So, but I also think the bigger picture, and Glenn brought this up, what do you want to be as an offense? And I think that's the bigger question here. Do you think Lamar Jackson and his skill set have outgrown this offense? And if your answer is yes, then I think that's where you think, okay, it's time to make a change. And that's John Harbaugh's question to answer. That's Eric DeCosta's and Steve Bisciotti's. has they gone as far as they can go with this Greg Roman offense, or do you still believe that this run first with all its creative run schemes and everything they do is still the best way to get where you want to go with Lamar as a quarterback? And I mean, that's a tough question, guys. It's a real tough question. And a lot of it's where you think of Lamar's development and how far he's come and how much he's capable of doing more in the passing game. So that's what it makes it such a tough call.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be interesting moving forward. I want to stay on Lamar Jackson, though, because, man, we did a video yesterday on the status of Lamar Jackson's contract. Basically, we talked about when we think the extension will happen, what it could potentially look like, things of that nature. To us, it wasn't a very big story because it seems like a no-brainer. It's just a matter of when, not if. I was really surprised, and Glenn, probably the same for you, by the amount of people just saying to let Lamar Jackson walk, or all these insane.
Or franchise tag him.
Yeah, franchise tag him.
Yeah.
I consider them insanity, but that's just my opinion. I'm just one man. So my question to you is, what do you think happens here with Lamar's contract? We think that it's a foregone conclusion in that it will happen this offseason. But there's a lot of factors like him not having an agent, having a team and things like that. How do you see this whole contract scenario playing out?
Yeah, and I mean, those factors have made it so hard to get kind of a gauge. I mean, there's just nobody even knows who's negotiating this contract. Right. It's amazing. That's how, and I've said this before, and this isn't I'm not deriding Lamar at all. He's so hard to cover as like a reporter just because you know so little about him. They do they're very careful of what they allow out there. He's very private. He doesn't have an inner circle that speaks to the media. So it's just so hard to get a gauge of where they're at and how they're going about this. But yeah, I think I don't want to say I'd be surprised if it doesn't get done this offseason, but I do think this is the time for it. And will there be some reservations based on kind of his struggles a little bit this year and some of the injury stuff that he sort of encountered this year? And sure. I mean, whenever you're talking about a contract of that magnitude, you're going to find stuff that kind of keep you up at night and make you question, is this the right thing to do? But everything they've done in terms of building this team and supporting the quarterback and some of their comments they've made have convinced, anybody who's around the team that this is Lamar Jackson's team and it's going to be Lamar Jackson's team. So, even though there's got some issues cropped up this year, I don't get the impression that they're suddenly doubting that. I think he's their guy. I think if they could execute a fair contract this offseason that works for both sides, then it'll get done. It'll get done. But, if they have to, you can play out the season under the 5th year option at the 23 and then, you at least have the franchise tag, but, that starts getting to be risky. And if there's no deal that gets done all off season, the storyline the second Lamar shows up in that building or whenever his first media session is going to be is, this contract, and that's not going to go away. And I don't think anybody wants to deal with that. So, if I'm sitting here now, I'm saying they've treated it like a formality. And this year, people wondered why it didn't get done this year. They had some cap issues this year that would have made it tough to kind of structure that deal and fit him in. But that excuse really doesn't exist this offseason. So I think this would be the time that'll get done.
No, and have you heard anything? I've heard a couple fans comment on social media that they heard that he's turned down 2 offers from the Ravens. Have you heard anything to back up that?
No, I haven't heard that. And I don't, as I said, the hardest thing to do as a reporter is to kind of admit you really don't know how this is going to go down, but I'd rather do that than look like a dope and tell you guys something I really don't know. I mean, it's, there seems to be a confidence that Eric DeCosta and him are going to be able to sit down. And, I'm sure that Lamar has advisors who have experience in this dealing with them. And in fact, I don't even think, a lot of people make negotiating deal with Lamar's mom. I don't even think that's allowed. I mean, she's not, I don't think, so, he has people he's dealing with. So him and Eric DeCosta have a great relationship. It's so tough of a deal, and that those circumstances make it tough, because the Ravens really can't win here. Well, you get the player long term. I mean, you have to feel good for both sides, but if they get him on like a sweetheart deal, the Ravens are going to get crushed. You're taking advantage of your franchise quarterback, and that's not the right message that they want out there. And but you have to be careful. I mean, these kind of deals can if they don't work out, can kind of debilitate a franchise for several years. So it's not like you can just reach across the table and say, "Here, Lamar, fill in what you want and make sure you're happy." You can't do that either. So it's the more we talk about this guy, that's just one of many things. This is going to be a very challenging offseason for Eric DeCosta. And I don't mean gloom and doom wise. It's just, there's a lot of issues that he has to address, a lot of things they have to take care of. And it starts with the franchise quarterback. I'd imagine that would be one of the things they'll want to get done, and it'll be atop the priority list.
Yeah, probably, absolutely.
Sorry about that, Jimbo.
You're good.
I was just going to say, and probably close second behind that, or somewhere near that top part of the list is going to be, what do they do with Marquise Brown? Definitely showed growth this year, but also down the stretch after Lamar's injury, kind of disappeared a bit. What are your thoughts on what they do with his fifth year and beyond? And also, how much does his relationship with Lamar benefit him in his chances of getting an extension?
Yeah, I think it has to be a factor, right? I mean, they're not just good teammates. I mean, they go everywhere together. They do everything together. So I would imagine if Lamar wanting to stay here for the foreseeable future, he wants Marquise Brown to be with him. Now, I'm not saying that's going to dictate everything, but I think that has to be a factor. And what else is a factor that is not being talked about a whole lot, but I think we all have to remember Marquise Brown was Eric DeCosta's first draft pick, and it's more symbolic than just that. I mean, Marquise Brown sort of represents DeCosta's vow to develop receivers. We're gonna break this damn criticism that we can't draft receivers, and I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna take more swings. He pretty much called the shot and said we're gonna take more swings. And in the last 3 drafts, they've drafted more receivers than anybody in the NFL. So, and Marquise Brown is was the first and sort of one of the headliners. Obviously, Bateman was a first rounder too here. So I think that factors. I think they're going to want to give him every chance to succeed. Is it an ideal situation given some of their cap challenges that he could be on the books for $13 million in I guess it would be 2023? It would be. Mm-hmm. No, that's a lot of money but next year, if he breaks out and, look, I thought through midseason that was a no-brainer that they were going to pick it up. Now it gives you a little bit of pause. So my guess is, as I sit here, that they will pick it up, but I don't feel great about that anymore. I really don't. And, it was a good segue into their tough decisions because, I think that's another one. But look, as I said, the history there with them drafting and DeCosta's relationship with him, his relationship with Lamar Jackson. But I also think we got to remember that there's been a lot of times where in an offense that isn't very receiver friendly, Marquise Brown's been very productive, and he's proven himself to be a big game player. He's came up big in their playoff games. He's had some good stretches. There's a lot of questions about his toughness or whatever, but this guy's one of the hardest workers on this team. I mean, this guy maybe works too hard to the point where he gets some of these soft tissue, lower body injuries because he's just constantly working. He's constantly on the field, constantly working out. People don't want to have him connected to his cousin, Antonio Brown, but there's one area that appear to be similar is just their work ethic off the field. And Marquise Brown gets after it. So there's a lot to like about him. And then there's a couple things like, the couple head scratching games a year where he has these egregious drops, or other times where he doesn't look very engaged in the game. So that's a lot to weigh. I mean, they got several weeks to make that decision, but I don't know what's going to change between now until then. They know what they have right now after watching it for 3 years. So that's going to be a tough call they have to make.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The train never stops when it comes to making tough decisions. It's just incredible. And Marquise has this ability to look smaller on the television the worse he plays. Right? Like, it's so weird. When he plays worse, he just gets smaller and smaller on the television.
I mean, a couple people, and we talked about this in the press box and stuff among ourselves. It just, he just didn't seem to be as into it when Lamar Jackson wasn't there. But I don't know if that's he's good friends with Tyler Huntley too. I mean, they have a good relationship, South Florida guys. So I don't necessarily think it was anything against Tyler Huntley. It just seems like Lamar brings an edge out of Marquise Brown. I mean, early in the season, we're seeing him fight for yards after catch. Yeah. And it was just like, okay, here's the guy that they thought, here's the guy that they thought we were getting. And then he made some plays. He was getting behind defenses, and that just everything that just ran dry. And then, in the end, seems like he was catching 5-yard passes 6 or 7 times a game. So there's a lot they have to figure out about him. And some of it also is on Greg Roman trying to get a little more out of him in different areas. You can't just keep saying, well, teams are taking away the deep ball. Well, yeah, that's what they tried to do. And you have to find a way to still make plays.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to keep talking about this offseason, but I do unfortunately have to go back to last season to talk about the defense really quickly. The defense was interesting to me in a lot of ways, in that I feel like they struggled to close at the end of some games. But then you look at the stats, they give up 13 points here, they give up 20 points there, and you're like, man, you should have won those games. Like, the defense is probably thinking we should have won those games. But what do you see? Same thing. Like, how do you grade this defense as far as how they played throughout the season, dealing with probably by the end of the season more injuries than the offense, right? Especially in secondary, is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I mean, we talked all year about the offense's injuries, but I think probably if you look back on it, defense got hit maybe even harder. I mean, in terms of, you lose basically your whole secondary. So, that's a good question, guys. How do you grade the unit as a whole? People see the 32nd ranked pass defense and they give an F. But you look at it, I think they were number 1 in the league in stopping the run. Yeah. Okay. Red zone, they were really good. Third down, they were really good. But I think nowadays it's just, you're not creating turnovers. It's going to be impossible to stop teams, right? I mean, there's no dominant defenses in today's NFL anymore. I mean, you have some defenses better than others, but I think where you hit them hard and grade in the C- range is just, there's just no plays being made, and obviously losing Marcus Peters was a big part of that. But how many interceptions did they drop in the secondary? I mean, Chuck Clark and Brandon Stevens, and by the end of the season, it was becoming a weekly thing, and just weren't opportunistic at all. Didn't get the ball out. I mean, Marlon Humphrey did. He got the end zone interception, I guess, against Bengals. I think it was in their home Bengals game. But, he didn't, the fruit punch or whatever it is, he didn't get a ball out all year in terms of causing fumbles. They just, they just didn't cause any turnovers. And then in some big games that, they play well against some good teams. And then they weren't able to close it, like the Rams and the Packers. And then earlier in the season, they played poorly against the Chiefs, and then they helped close that game in the fourth. So it was just kind of, tale of two seasons kind of thing. But everything we saw from them, I think, is indicative of a unit that really needs to be overhauled this offseason. I think, like, you look at it and, like, what did they do really well? They stopped the run, obviously, but they didn't consistently get pressure with their front four. They didn't tackle well. They had communication breakdowns. They didn't force turnovers. They didn't cover well at times. There's just too many things there. And I think, as we push the talk forward to some of their needs and all that stuff, I think you look at that group as a group that's gotten a little old in certain areas. And every level, I think they need help. I'm not saying, they don't have pieces. I like Owe, and I'm still not completely as down on Patrick Queen as other people are. And you should get Peters and, Marlon Humphrey back. I thought Brandon Stevens, for 3rd round pick, who never played safety in his life, performed well. So there are pieces there but they just need a lot more. I mean, we've seen them address the offense hard in previous off seasons. I think this is the off season where you go over the other side of the ball and do some heavy lifting on defense.
I like to hear that.
Yeah, and you mentioned how they were getting older, and a couple, a lot of those guys were in the front seven, and specifically Campbell, Brandon Williams, and Justin Houston are guys that I think a lot of fans are some fans are kind of split on whether or not they should kick the tires and say, hey, Calais, you want to play one more year? Hey, Brandon, you want to finish your career here? And so what are your thoughts on those three veterans in the front seven being Calais, Brandon Williams, and Justin Houston?
Yeah, it seemed like a formality that Calais was going to retire, and this was going to be his last year and his last go at it. I mean, that was pretty much expected when they gave him the 2 year, when they made the trade and extended him 1 year, that, look, he'd be these 2 years and that would probably be it. But, you talk to people around the building late in the season, and it seemed to be leaning the other way, that he really felt good. I mean, I think it was Clifton Brown of BaltimoreRavens.com did a great story on Calais, and he talked about how much money he spent on his body with masseuses and trainers, and just, this guy wants the Super Bowl so bad. So it would not surprise me if he comes back. And, I think the Ravens will be in the mix, but it also wouldn't surprise me to see him playing elsewhere. I mean, I think if you asked me 2 months ago, I'd say he'd retire. Now I'd probably say I'd lean the other way. I think he'll be back playing somewhere. I don't have that on good authority. I think he still has a decision to make. But basically what I'm saying is I don't feel strongly that he's going to hang it up as I would. So I think he still could be an option for the Ravens. Brandon Williams, here's the thing with both Campbell and Brandon Williams. If you just bring all these guys back and maybe throw a second or third round pick in the mix, did you really do enough there? I don't know. I mean, I think at some point you need to get young and let younger guys play. And you have Madubuike, you have Broderick Washington as a rotational guy. He's fine. You got a couple guys that, Isaiah Mack and maybe McKenzie that can be rotational in the back end guys, but you need a couple of young frontline explosive guys with Madubuike. So with Brandon Williams, if he comes back, is he willing to play for like close to the, for $1 million a year or something? And can you move on as a defense into a new phase when a guy that's been there forever and is still kind of looked up to? I mean, at some point, don't you have to change the leadership a little bit of that group? And so I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if he's back, but I think it's time to move on for some of these guys. I think you'll see Pernell McPhee move on, retire, or play somewhere else, probably retire. I think you'll see Jimmy Smith move on. Levine, obviously, doesn't have a major role in defense, but I think you'll see him move on. I would not be surprised if you see about 4 or 5 guys retire from this Ravens team. Brandon Williams says he still wants to play, so I think there'll be a market for him, at least for a kind of a modest 1-year deal somewhere. And who knows, maybe the Ravens would be interested, but I think they know they need to do a lot of defense, and they need to get away from some of the guys. And who knows, Tyus Bowser's injury is a problem, yeah, he has the whole offseason now but Achilles are no joke. Some people react to him better than others. I mean, it's weird. You never know how serious. I mean, we just saw Cam Akers for the Rams come back in 5.5 months. So Bowser has time, but you just don't know. I mean, and Jimmy Smith's a guy who's had pretty much every injury in the book, and he says Achilles was one of his easier rehabs, so who knows, and Achilles used to be one thought of as like a career death sentence. So who knows, but suddenly without Bowser, like, what do you have outside linebacker on the edge? I mean, you have Owe, but can you count on Ferguson? I don't think so. So I think you're going to be again in the market for another veteran 1-year type pass rusher. And if Houston's sitting there willing to take another kind of sweetheart deal, I wouldn't completely dismiss it. But, I think we've seen the last 2 years that his tank is pretty close to empty.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I just, as we talk about this offseason, one of the guys, of course, that comes to to mind is Bradley Bozeman, right? If you're talking about the priorities for the Baltimore Ravens in this offseason, you speak to us either positionally or the guys that we need to get back. For me, I think that Brad is the one deal that I feel good about that the Ravens have marked as like a must-have, want to get done based on who he is, how well he's played, his durability and things like that, and who he is off the field, of course. But what's your take on Bradley Bozeman and the possibility of the Ravens getting that deal done? And then what do you see as the priorities for the Ravens in this offseason?
Yeah, the Bozeman thing is tricky because I think it's something both sides want to get done. And it seems like there's a clear difference in opinion in how much it should cost. This isn't a new kind of revelation. I mean, they've been there's been periodic talks since going back to before the season, even before they saw him play a snap as a starting center. And they just haven't been in the same area code with his side's asking price and, what the Ravens feel like he's worth and they're willing to pay. And, you start and they'd like to keep him and he really wants to stay here. So when you have that as the common ground, you feel like there's a deal to get done, but it's going to take some compromise. And I never want to say never. I mean, right now, if you probably ask the particulars, they probably tell you that they don't see it happening, but we've all seen things change so dramatic. All it takes is one phone call to change the course of a negotiation. Yep. Bradley, technically you're not allowed to talk to, teams aren't allowed to talk to players, player agents and all that until, I think we're probably 2 months from that. Yeah. Mid-March. But agents find a way to figure out what's players' value on the open market and who may be interested in all that. So he's going to get a better idea. And I think if the Ravens are in the neighborhood, they'll re-sign him. But I just, they've not been able to bridge the gap at this point. They're quite a bit apart, and who knows if they'll be able to. But again, as I said, I would never rule that one out just because I know how both sides feel about each other. And you said the priorities. Beyond what we talked about, obviously Lamar's contract is a priority. They're going to have to really nail this draft. I think we all know that. The prices are going up. They have some huge deals on the books for, Stanley and Humphrey and Andrews and probably Lamar next. So draft's going to be a big thing, but they're going to have to figure out in free agency too, how to plug a few of these holes. I mean, if you look at the guys, you mentioned Bozeman as one of the guys, and I agree. You go to Patrick Ricard and look, this is an important player who means a lot to a lot of people in that building. I mean, I don't want to say they discovered Patrick Ricard, but certainly I don't think anyone envisioned him being what he became in Baltimore. And they were the ones with the idea to switch him over to fullback. So he means a lot to a lot of people, but are you paying $6 million a year for him? I mean, it's probably what it's going to cost. I mean, Juszczyk's the highest paid fullback in the league. And I'd imagine Ricard's agent will probably try to, pitch him as sort of more than a fullback. Like he should be paid kind of like a one of these hybrid and tight end and all that. And again, that's another tough decision. They've talked, both sides have talked already. And I think the Ravens would love to have that deal done and behind them, but it's just going to get at some point you can't keep everybody, and you're going to have to really decide who's the luxury or who the necessities. That's going to be tough with their free agent class. I mean, I know people love to dismiss Anthony Averett, and my guess is he goes elsewhere too, just because they already have so much paying, so much with Humphrey and Peters. But you lose him, Jimmy retires. I doubt Tavon Young's back on his current contract. And even if he is, I think, you have to understand it is just how his body just has a hard time holding up. And it's just now cornerback becomes a huge need. So there's so many things that can affect what they do. But there's really, I don't want to act like they're in bad shape because they're not. It's not at all. They still have a really good roster, and you're going to get a lot of players back healthy. You still have a unanimous league MVP from 2 years ago. I think that, you have a receiver group that's probably, this is kind of one of the first years they're going to probably draft a receiver, at least sign a vet free agent on the cheap, even with Watkins walking. But you don't really have to do a whole lot there, which is, I don't know how I'm going to fill how I'm going to fill content without writing about receivers available for 50 times this offseason, but I'll figure out a way. But there's a lot to like there. But yeah, it's hard to find positions that they won't need to address in some form or fashion. So
I'm sweating here.
Jeff, you think there's a team that is willing and can see value in signing Pat Ricard? Because no other team, I mean, what other team uses a fullback that way?
It's true. And that's the thing. I mean, is that money out there for him if the Ravens don't pay him? I mean, I love Patrick Ricard.
Yeah.
I do not want anything to come off as I'm being negative towards him. Like, what a stud and how he's made himself into a great player, great team guy. But I don't think he's dynamic like Juszczyk, if you know what I mean. I mean, I think he does other things for you that maybe Juszczyk, he's better blocker than Juszczyk, but Juszczyk does more, runs the ball, is a better weapon in the passing game. It's just a little more dynamic than Patrick Ricard in that way. So I don't know that anyone's going to be looking at him like a Juszczyk type. There's not a lot of teams that are using fullbacks, and even the ones that are they willing to make that kind of, financial expenditure on a player like that? I don't know. Like that's going to be interesting. So that's why, I'm not sure. It takes is one team though. That's why, there's a lot of teams that love how the Ravens build it and what they do in certain things. And their free agents long get paid pretty well. So all it takes is one, but that is absolutely a legitimate question. If not the Ravens, who? Because if you line up fits for Patrick Ricard, nobody comes close to being as good fit as Baltimore.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because if the Raiders had the same regime, I would have pegged him as a perfect offseason signing for the Raiders. But now that, they don't even have a front office, essentially. Yeah, exactly. So speaking of front office, though, Mr. Ortiz himself, of course, is flying all over the country at this point, getting interviews and things of that nature. It sounds like the Giants are apparently, I'm sure you've seen the tweet as well. They're infatuated with the way Baltimore Ravens do execute their business. And so naturally, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of interest there. So two questions here. Is there if he leaves for a vacant, GM position, is there any sort of compensation that the Ravens get? And then in addition to that, describe just how big of a loss you see that as for the Baltimore Ravens front office.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't get any compensation. That would be for minority candidates only. It'll be interesting. It's Giants have 3 finalists for their GM job, and he hasn't been named as one. That doesn't mean they can't have a 4th. But they've brought back 3 guys for double interviews. I have not heard. I mean, the Ravens really don't comment when their team's interviewing their executives. So I haven't heard specifically whether he's still in the running for that job. But the point is, Joe Ortiz is going to be a GM somewhere. I mean, he's been very good at his job. And I was saying earlier today, I think if Joe Ortiz played the game more, and by the game I mean, leaking stuff to reporters and talking himself up to reporters and getting his name in headlines, I bet you Joe Ortiz would have had a job by now as it is. He's just not that guy. I mean, he's kind of one of those behind the scenes guys. He's not a self-promoter at all. And he just likes, he likes to go find football players. He fits in perfectly with the Ravens front office. So he definitely would be a loss if they, if he had to go somewhere else. But I really think, as loyal as he's been and as productive and accomplished as he's been with the Ravens, I think there'd be a lot of people in the building that would welcome that just because they feel like he deserves an opportunity to run a front office somewhere. So we'll see. If it's not this season, I imagine he'll probably get an opportunity soon.
Yeah, that would be well deserved. Seems like a guy who certainly paid his dues. Last question before I have to ask about the offensive line, because if Bozeman's not back, you feel good about right guard. and then I mean, yeah, Stanley's coming back, but every year he goes down, and I almost wonder if you gave some truth serum to the front office, if they may regret such a financial investment in him. But what's your thoughts on the offensive line heading into the offseason?
Yeah, you say, I think, the biggest Ravens optimist looks at it and says, okay, we could have Ronnie Stanley at left tackle next year and Jawan James at right tackle. Then we have Zeitler at right guard, and you either re-sign Bozeman or draft the kid from Iowa, and Ben Cleveland will be left guard, and that's a great offensive line. But I mean, it doesn't work. I mean, I think people seem to forget Jawan James has not played 2 full years. I mean, he's played in 3 football games over the last 3 years. So it'll be good. It's good that he got that practice time with the team. It'll be good that if he has a healthy offseason, and look, if he's healthy, he's going to get plenty of time to show it. So it could work out great. Who knows? It could work out great, but you can't bank on him and Ronnie Stanley being healthy in week 1. You just can't do it. Ronnie Stanley's had 2 major ankle surgeries in a year. Last time I talked to Ronnie Stanley was probably about a month and a half ago. He obviously doesn't want, increase expectations, but even he admitted he can't be sure what he's going to be and how healthy he's going to be come July and August and September. I mean, you can be optimistic all you want, but he had a career-threatening injury. Nick Boyle, career-threatening injury. And, it's not like these guys don't want to play. They badly want to be out there. So, yeah, I mean, you look at it and, McCarry, if he's your 5th, if he's your top, I think you're okay. But do you hear me, guys?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay,
yeah,
my bad. Okay, my bad.
Okay.
So I think if you have McCarry, is a good piece to bring back. At best, the top reserve. If you need, he's a competent starter. You pretty much, I think, have to roll with Ben Cleveland at left guard. I mean, you just have to hope he stays healthy. You have to let these guys play. You can't keep using mid-round picks on offensive linemen. I'm not just talking about 5th or 6th rounders, I'm talking about 3rd and 4th rounders. They've used a lot of them and just not allow them to play. I mean, we saw it with Bredesen, and he got traded, and you got something back for him. And that they have, the 4th overall pick and day 3 of the draft, because the Giants, in that trade is amazing. So I'm not disparaging that pick, but you got to let these guys play at some point. So I think it's Cleveland at left guard. I think it's Zeitler at right guard. And the perfect scenario is Stanley and James at tackle. And then I think you figure out the center. If not Bozeman, is it Cologne, or is you draft a guy? But, I think the one thing Eric DeCosta is going to get the most criticism about from this past season is he didn't do enough to solidify the offensive line. Even with signing Zeitler, and the Villanueva was probably not the best plan B for Orlando Brown. I'm still not going to rip the Ravens for trading Orlando Brown. I know some people will. I'm not going to. He didn't want to be here. They were going to lose him anyway in a year. They got a 1st-round pick for him. Other stuff, obviously, there's as part of the trade. I think Orlando Brown's a very good player. I don't think he's a dominant left tackle that you're going to pay 18, 19 million for. I think Chiefs found that out. Very good player, as I said. Also great dude. But I have no problem with that trade. What I had a problem with is that Villanueva was their handpicked replacement. I think you saw a guy like Morgan Moses played really well. Probably could have been had. I think Charles Leno, who Washington wind up signing, probably could have been had. These were guys that probably would have been better plan Bs for Brown. So I can't imagine Eric's going to leave himself vulnerable at offensive line again. I think they're going to go lean towards more of the side of having more than enough rather than thinking you have enough, and, you bring back a bunch of guys. They got the guy from Dallas that they picked up on waiver claim that, didn't report. Maybe he'll be back. You re-sign David Sharp, but those are kind of periphery guys. You're going to need to take a swing early in the draft, at least at one offensive lineman. I'd be shocked if they came out of the draft with less than 2 offensive linemen within the first 4 rounds.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. You can consider me one of those optimists for sure, because I'm hoping that it works out as planned. But Jeff, why don't you let everyone know that happens to live under a rock and doesn't know where they can currently find you, where they can find you, what you're working on, things of that nature.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's at theathletic.com. And, it's this time of year, it can be tough kind of with content, because there's no availability. But this is going to be exciting off season. So, I'll take some time off here and there, but I'll mostly be writing several times a week. And there'll be plenty to read. And, as I said, this is going to be fascinating. I mean, the more I talk about it, the more I realize how busy it's going to be this off season. And this organization, I think we all know, they don't stay down for long. I expect them to be aggressive. I expect them to put a lot in the draft, but I also think they'll have a few surprises up their sleeve in terms of roster and what else they do. I think they'll have an aggressive plan, which will start to formulate this week when they're all with the owner at the team summit that they have, and go from there. So it's going to be a fun year. I appreciate everyone who subscribes and follows me, and I look forward to continuing interaction.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff. Have a great evening. We appreciate the time, and we'll talk soon.
Always enjoyed talking to you guys. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yep,
Thanks,
you.
Joe.